I knew my stepmother, Carolina, didn't like me, but I never imagined she'd be so bold. I grew up under her critical gaze. My dad remarried when I was 12, and from that moment on, my life became an endless, silent battle. Carolina never outright mistreated me, but she made sure I knew I was unwanted through sharp glances, subtle remarks, and that ever-present air of disapproval. My dad, bless his heart, thought he was keeping the peace. Over the years, our relationship turned cold, almost non-existent. I figured I'd never have to deal with her again. But then, the invitation arrived. It was an elegant envelope, golden, heavy, as if it carried more than just a piece of paper. My name was written on it in pretentiously sophisticated calligraphy. I hesitated before opening it, and as soon as I read the words inside, my stomach twisted. Carolina was getting married, but what made my throat tighten wasn't the wedding itself. It was what wasn't written. There was no mention of my father. Not a single word. That's when I knew something was very wrong. I grabbed my phone and called him. No answer. I tried again and again until I finally managed to find him at home the next day. He looked tired, more aged than I remembered, and then he confirmed everything. Carolina had asked for a divorce. No fights, no major explanations. She just decided to move on, and apparently she had already found someone new, someone wealthier, more powerful, someone who could give her the life she always wanted. She had discarded my father like an old, outdated accessory, and now she was inviting me to watch her big moment. It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was doing. This wasn't a gesture of civility. This wasn't a genuine invitation. She wanted me there to be humiliated. That night, I stared at the invitation for hours, my fingers gripping the paper so tightly they could have torn it apart. Every fiber of my being told me to ignore it, to pretend it never arrived. But then, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the defeated look in my father's eyes. Maybe it was the years of subtle insults, passive-aggressive games, and quiet contempt. Maybe it was just pure, unfiltered rage. But at that moment, I knew I was going to that wedding, and if Carolina wanted a spectacle, she was going to get one she'd never forget. Accepting the invitation was easy. The hard part was figuring out how I would make Carolina regret asking me. I didn't want something obvious. I didn't want a dramatic scene in front of everyone. That would be predictable and make her the victim. I needed to be subtle, clever. I wanted her to destroy herself, and all I would do is hold up the mirror so everyone could see who she really was. I spent the next few days gathering information. Who would the fiancé be? What was her relationship with the new family like? How did she want the world to see her? The answer came during a dinner with a distant cousin who happened to know some people from Carolina's social circle. It was there that I discovered the most precious detail of all. Carolina was trying to reinvent herself. She had painted a new version of herself for the fiancé and his family. She said she came from a humble background, that she built everything through hard work, that she had always been a family woman, generous and caring, a first-class liar. I knew the truth. She had always been obsessed with status, money, appearances, and now she was about to marry a rich man from a traditional and extremely conservative family. The kind of people who pride themselves on family, values, and would never accept someone with a questionable past. And Carolina had a very questionable past. So, I spent the week organizing everything. I got old photos, some messages she had sent to my dad before the divorce, things that made it clear she was only with him for the financial comfort. I even managed to get a video from one of her outbursts at a family party years ago, where she yelled at my grandmother because she hadn't received an expensive enough gift. I wouldn't need to expose any of this directly. I just needed to plant the right seeds and let curiosity do the rest. On the wedding day, I would look flawless. I didn't want to seem bitter or vengeful. On the contrary, I wanted everyone to see a version of me they never would have imagined. Confident, radiant, unshakable. The wedding day had arrived. the kind of over-the-top event that only Carolina could pull off. Everything screamed luxury, but in a forced, almost desperate way. It was as if every detail was shouting, "Look at me, I made it." And that just made everything more pathetic. I got there early, dressed in an elegant but understated navy blue gown. Nothing too flashy, at least not yet. I greeted a few acquaintances, handed out polite smiles, and let the curious stares linger on me. I knew exactly what they were thinking. What was the bride's stepdaughter doing here? The atmosphere was tense, and Carolina clearly hadn't expected me to actually show up. As soon as she saw me, her face twisted into something that looked like a mix of surprise and anger. But surrounded by guests, she couldn't make a scene. She just pressed her lips together and carried on pretending to be the perfect bride, on her perfect day. What she didn't know was that I had already made my first moves on the board. Throughout the ceremony, I casually chatted with a few people. I asked innocent questions about the groom, his family, how lucky Carolina was to have found someone so great. My goal was never to say anything directly, just to plant doubts. Little seeds of curiosity that, if nurtured, would grow on their own. The groom, William, seemed like a decent guy. Young, successful, the kind of guy who'd always had everything handed to him, but ironically seemed to be searching for someone with a difficult past so he could feel like a hero. The type of man Carolina knew how to manipulate very well. But his family wasn't so naive. They were rich, traditional, and fiercely protective. And more importantly, they were curious. During the cocktail hour, while Carolina was busy being the center of attention, I quietly approached the groom's mother, a refined lady with impeccable posture. I started a casual chat, nothing too risky, until she politely mentioned how inspiring Carolina was, how she had overcome so many challenges and built such a beautiful life. And that's when I played my card. I smiled, gave a confused look, and murmured something like, "Oh, so that's the version she told. Interesting." After that, all it took was to excuse myself and step away to grab a glass of champagne, leaving the insinuation hanging in the air. It worked better than I expected. I could see the looks being exchanged, the whispers beginning. The internet is a wonderful thing, and when influential people want answers, they get them quickly. The tension grew slowly, like poison spreading through the air. I savored every second of it. The domino effect started faster than I expected. People were restless, exchanging suspicious glances, and I could feel that something was about to explode. Carolina kept smiling and posing for photos, oblivious to the fact that the foundation of her perfect world was starting to crack. The first spark came from one of the groom's brothers, a guy who seemed to be the most skeptical in the family. I saw him pull out his phone and start typing furiously. Shortly after, he whispered something in his mother's ear. Her expression changed immediately. And then it happened. In the middle of dinner, while Carolina basked in the attention of her guests, the groom's mother stood up and asked to speak with her son. Her tone was low, but heavy with something dangerous. Doubt. The groom furrowed his brow and followed her to a more private corner of the reception. It didn't take long for his father and brother to join the conversation. Carolina's gaze finally met mine. She realized I knew something. She stood up, adjusted her dress, and with her best elegant bride expression, walked over to them. I didn't hear everything that was said, but their expressions spoke louder than words. William stared at Carolina as if he were seeing a stranger. His mother was livid. His father crossed his arms, clearly frustrated, and his brother just shook his head in disbelief. After a few minutes of tense silence, William turned and left the reception, followed by his family. Carolina stood frozen in the middle of the hall, still, as everyone around her tried to pretend they weren't watching a disaster unfold in real time. What she didn't know was that the most interesting part was yet to come. I had already prepared the final blow. At the buffet table, one of the waiters discreetly handed Carolina an envelope. Inside, There were copies of some messages she had sent months ago to an ex she apparently had never gotten over. Messages full of regret, confessions, and even some long-term plans in case her marriage with William didn't work out. And the best part? The envelope had no return address. She opened it, read it, and turned pale. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a culprit, but no one seemed to notice her panic. By this point, the guests were getting restless. The groom had disappeared, his family too, and the bride now looked like she was on the edge of a breakdown. The wedding she had meticulously planned was crumbling before everyone's eyes, and me? I just sipped my champagne, watching the show I had orchestrated. The room was filled with an eerie silence, the kind of silence that hangs in the air, where everyone knows something's happening, but no one has the guts to be the first to say it. Carolina was still holding the envelope, her fingers gripping the paper so tightly it looked like she might tear it just with sheer willpower. Her gaze swept over the crowd, searching for a culprit. I knew that sooner or later, she'd figure out I was behind all of this. But for now, all she could see were a crowd of guests awkwardly whispering to each other. The groom still hadn't come back. Neither had his mother. The brother, who seemed to be enjoying every second of the chaos, looked at Carolina with a half-smile full of irony. He clearly knew something very shady was going on. Carolina took a step back, breathing deeply. Her skin was pale, a stark contrast to the flawless makeup she wore. A few of her friends came over, probably to ask what was going on, but she pulled away. And then, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor, the speakers at the party let out a screeching noise before an unfamiliar voice took over the room. It was an audio, and not just any audio. Someone, probably one of the waiters who'd received a generous tip from me, had connected a phone to the sound system, and now the whole party was listening to Carolina's tearful voice, saying things that should have stayed buried. They were messages to an ex-boyfriend where she confessed she was only marrying for financial security, that William was a nice guy but boring, and that if she had a choice, she'd pick another life. The reaction was immediate. People glanced at each other, some wide-eyed, others already pulling out their phones to record the moment. Carolina tried to rush to the sound booth, but the damage was already done. When the audio finally ended, one of the groomsmen commented something, and without hiding his disdain, he set his champagne glass down on the table before leaving. Others began to do the same. The exodus was quiet, but deafening. The ceremony, which was supposed to be the most perfect day of Carolina's life, had turned into something out of an embarrassing reality show. The crowd had made up its mind. She was the villain of the night. Could have left right then. I had already done enough, but something inside me wanted to see the grand finale. So I grabbed another glass of champagne and waited. I walked up to one of the waiters and handed him a small box, asking him to deliver it to Carolina. He hesitated, probably feeling that there was already enough drama, but followed the instructions. When she opened the box, her face froze completely, as if her brain refused to process what she was seeing. Inside, perfectly folded, was the t-shirt she gave me on my 18th birthday. White, cheap cotton with a photo of me taken at the worst possible moment. Mouth full of braces, eyes half closed, hair a mess, and right below, in big, bold letters, the phrase printed, "The daughter I never had and never wanted." I remember her laughing, along with her friends, the day she gave it to me. I remember forcing a smile, pretending it was just an innocent joke, while my stomach churned. Now, the shirt was back, but the crowd wasn't laughing. The silence around her was suffocating. Carolina finally looked at me. It was just for a second, a brief moment when our eyes met. But in that instant, she knew. She knew it wasn't just a coincidence. She knew fate wasn't just playing a trick on her. I saw her open her mouth, maybe to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I left before it all really ended, before anyone tried to confront me, before the dust settled. As I walked away, I heard murmurs, saw guests scattering, realized the background music had already been turned off. The party was officially over. And Carolina, for the first time, was exactly in the place I had been forced to occupy for so many years. If you liked this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Do you think what she did to her stepmother was fair, or did she overreact?